Good evening and welcome to SWANA's 2020 forum to meet the DC at-large council member candidates. We're very excited that we have Mitch Ryals as our moderator tonight, and you'll be hearing from him shortly. In the meantime, I want to welcome everyone who's new to our program and welcome back everyone who joined us last night. I think you'll find this an interesting and informative forum. I want to just tell you a minute about SWANA, which was founded in 1964. We are a nonprofit organization that's run entirely by volunteers. We have very active task forces that work to fulfill our mission to serve the residents of Southwest DC and to improve the quality of life for all residents. We also keep the community informed by the publication of our local newspaper, the Southwestern. We work to help create rich and equal social, educational, and economic opportunities for Southwest residents and to assist in providing opportunities for gainful employment and to preserve the diverse history of DC. This forum is offered as an educational effort to afford residents to hear and connect to the candidates for the position of DC at-large council member. SWANA is a 501c3 nonprofit, and as such, we do not endorse any political candidate, but we feel it's important to afford our residents the opportunity to meet the candidate so that they can make, or you can make, an informed decision when you vote. And we know that all of us are going to turn out to vote on November 3rd. The at-large council member is very important to us. 13 members make up the council. A representative is elected from each of the 8 wards, and 5 members, including the chairman, elected at large. At large is a designation for members of a governing body who are elected or appointed to represent the whole city rather than just one ward. So I want to take, again, the opportunity to thank our moderator, Mitch Ryals of the Washington City paper, and the amazing team that helped pull this together. Carlton Julian, our technology wizard, and Bianca Crecilius, our event planner. Bianca is a former SWANA scholarship recipient. She graduated from Benjamin Banneker High School and from Penn State. Today, Bianca is a professional event planner, and we are delighted that she is giving back and working with SWANA. And now I'm going to bring on Bianca, and she will give you important information about tonight's format. Before I bring Bianca on, I want to let you know that our SWANA scholarship students, our 2020 recipients, have started a campaign for DC statehood. Representative Mikowski has said that if she gets letters from residents in the district, she will very strongly support our quest for DC statehood. And so while we don't have the information on our screen tonight, you can find it on our website, or you can email me, president@swana.org, and I could send you all the information about how to get the letters in. The deadline is tomorrow, and so we're sorry for the late notice, but many of you know it because you receive our e-blast and you receive the Southwestern. But anyone else who's interested, please feel free to email me again at president@swana.org. And now I'll bring Bianca on, and she'll give you important information about tonight's format. Enjoy the forum, ask questions, and vote on November 3rd.
Thank you, Donna, and good evening, everyone. I am Bianca Crecilius, and I am the event planner for SWANA. I am also the owner and lead planner of Crecilius Creations, which is an event planning business based here in DC that I launched earlier this year. First, I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening and give special thanks to our candidates as well as tonight's moderator, Mitch Ryals from the Washington City paper. We are grateful to have your participation in tonight's event. And before Mitch kicks us off by introducing tonight's candidates, I would first like to share some ground rules ahead of tonight's panel Q&A. Each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to introduce themselves and give their opening statements, From there, the panel will begin, and Mitch will pose each question to the candidates. Each candidate will have up to 1 minute to respond to questions. And as we receive questions from the audience via the chat box, Mitch will direct these questions to the designated candidate for a response. If there is a general question that is asked amongst the candidates, and if they would like to address it, I ask that each candidate raise their hand if they would like to speak to avoid talking over one another. I ask that everyone be respectful of these rules as well as each other's time. And with that said, Mitch, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mitch Ryals. I'm a reporter for Washington City Paper. I'm moderating tonight's panel discussion with our council at-large candidates. Thank you all for tuning in. I have just, I guess, a brief description of the kinds of questions I'll ask. I have a list of questions here that largely follow yesterday evening's panel discussion moderated by the Washington Post's Fennet Nirapil. And then I will also draw from, as Bianca mentioned, some reader-submitted questions, or excuse me, viewer-submitted questions as well. So that's all that I had. So the first candidate that I'll introduce here is, if he is here, Marcus Batchelor. There he is, Marcus. Go ahead. You have 2 minutes for an introduction.
Thanks, Mitch, and thanks to Swana and Donna and the Southwester for having us this evening. My name is Marcus Batchelor. I'm a third-generation Washingtonian, born, raised, and currently still live in Congress Heights. I also have the pleasure of currently serving as the Vice President and Ward 8 Representative on the DC State Board of Education, a position I've held for the last 4 years, really fighting for 41 schools and 16,000 students in Southeast and Southwest, but all DC kids. I'm running for the DC Council because I believe that it's time for a new generation of leadership, both with the right experience to really take advantage of this moment and our time in our history, to build equity in a new way, to advance bold ideas and bring together a citywide coalition to do it. But it's also important that our next at-large council member have the right perspective. When I talk about issues related to public health, it matters to me because my mom's a home health aide going back and forth to work as an essential worker, but I was also born in the city's only public hospital 5 weeks premature to a high-risk pregnancy. I care about public education because I got the opportunity to get one in our city's public schools, but I saw so many of my friends fall through the cracks and become victims of poverty or gun violence or those things that so many of our young people are relegated to. And I care about making sure that we have vibrant communities because I am one of the few candidates in this race who actually lives in a food desert, who actually has to worry about the threat of gun violence walking back and forth to my neighborhood businesses, the few that there are. And so I'm going to go to the council every day to make sure that this city finally works for all of us, that we work on raising the economic floor for our poorest residents, that we give access to truly affordable housing across the income levels, that we finally equitably fund our schools and close the digital divide, that all of our communities have a grocery store that's not 3 bus rides away and a hospital that meets our needs. We can do this as a city if we have the type of bold leadership to get it done. And I've proven to district residents that I can be that bold leader. And my hope is that we can take that work to the next level together on the DC Council. And I look forward to talking more tonight. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Marcus. Our next candidate is Marcus Goodwin. There he is. Marcus, take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Marcus Goodwin. I'm a DC native from Columbia Heights. My mother immigrated here from Senegal in 1985. Today, she's a DC public school teacher. My father moved to DC in 1976 to attend Howard University. He's the first person in our family to attend and graduate from college. I grew up in a working class single parent household, primarily with my mother. I'm the fifth of 8 children in my family, and I'm a product of our DC Public Schools. I'm also an Eagle Scout. Professionally, I've been working the last 7 years building affordable housing here in the district, promoting equitable community growth, and providing vocational training and after-school programs for our at-risk youth in the district so that they can get a good paying job and be a part of the district's economic renaissance. If elected to the DC Council, I'll be focused on keeping residents safe and building a stronger, more equitable economy where every resident has the opportunities they need to succeed. Having lived in DC for over 3 decades, I understand that right now, many residents are struggling with the cost of living, the fear of gun violence in their communities, and feel the pain of inequality that's growing across the district. We've put off addressing these issues for far too long. That's why I'm fighting to put people over politics. I will fight for practical solutions that address the real problems facing residents. With regards to housing, I have plans, including ensuring that there's more affordable home ownership for district residents so that they can fix their cost of living and stay here for the long term and build generational wealth. For education, I have plans to ensure that after-school programs are adequately funded across the district. And for economic development, I want everyone to be included in this economic renaissance in the district. And I have the professional experience to deliver that. So by putting people over politics, I'll be moving the city forward. Thank you for your time. I look forward to speaking this evening, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Our next candidate is Chander Jayaraman.
I'm Chander Jayaraman, and I'm running because I think we can do so much better for our families and our community as a whole. I think we're in the middle of a crisis, which requires a council member who has the right expertise, the right experience, and a track record of producing results. And that's me, Chander. As an 18-year veteran in the field of emergency preparedness, who helped write the pandemic plan that we're operating under, and also currently helping to childcare centers to reopen safely. I know what it looks like when we get ready to reopen our schools and what we should look for and what steps we need to take to ensure the safety of our students as well as our teachers. I'm an elected ANC commissioner for the past 8 years, and I've worked with small businesses across ANC 6B, which is Barracks Row and Eastern Market, to help them survive through this crisis. And I've formed a working group called Barracks Row Working Group to help them work together so to bring customers to the entire area. Because I know that they're the lifeblood of our community, and they are what make living in this great city such a joy. But I also understand we're at a critical moment in our city, and that we need to ensure the safety of our neighborhoods. And that's why I convened, and I was the first one to do so, convened ANC commissioners from across the city to talk about policing and how to reimagine it. I brought together NAACP, the Deputy Chief of Police, council members, and a variety of stakeholders for a citywide town hall, because I do believe that we ask our police to do way too much, and that our other agencies need to step up to the plate to deliver the services where they're needed, when they're needed. And so I was the first one to do that. These are the things that families have campaigned across the district.
Sorry to
That's what
interrupt.
I'm focused on as a council member on the DC Council.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Ed Lazier.
There we go. Great. Well, thank you, Swana, for hosting this forum tonight. It is nice to see you all again. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you voters. So I came to the district in 1986 to teach math to 5th and 6th graders from low-income families in Mount Pleasant. And I fell in love with those kids and then quickly fell in love with the district as well. Every single event of my adult life has happened here in DC. My wife, Suzanne, and I got married here. We bought our first and only home in Brookland in 1992. We raised our 2 sons, David and Adam, through DC public schools. I've served DC as a PTA leader, a Scoutmaster at Cub Scouts, a foster parent, and president of my congregation, Temple Micah. But but I've also chose 20 years ago to devote my life to making my career to making the district a more equitable place, to promoting economic and racial justice. And I got that opportunity through my leadership at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. At DCFPI, I work to address the city's most serious inequities in housing and schools and jobs. I mastered the budget and built relationships with organizations and people across the city to fight for a just budget, and had major policy wins, like a $15 minimum wage, paid family medical leave. I chaired an education finance commission that made the common sense recommendation to steer more resources to high poverty schools, and then I fought to get that into law, into the budget, and into the schools where the students attend. And I'm running for DC Council because I'm concerned that the city's prosperity is coming at a cost of rising homelessness, wider school inequities, displacement of Black residents, things that are unacceptable. I want to put racial and economic equity at the heart of DC's agenda and tackle our challenges at the scale they demand. I'm frustrated by leaders who say they care, but then don't govern like they do. So I'm running to be a progressive champion to end homelessness and fully address the city's affordable housing crisis, to tackle school inequities at the scale they demand, and to create better jobs for DC residents. I'm running to be the progressive leader in the district, and that leadership has been recognized by the endorsements that I've received, including Attorney General Carl Racine.
Thank you, Mr. Lazier. Sorry to interrupt. That's your time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And our looks like our fifth candidate is Alexander Pedro.
Good evening. I'm Alex Padro. The slogan for my campaign is Dreams Come True, and that's shorthand for I want to help make every DC neighborhood's dreams come true. Over the past 20 years, both as an advisory neighborhood commissioner and as executive director of Shaw Main Streets, I've been working on transforming the Shaw neighborhood from a place where folks came if they were looking for drugs, if they were looking for prostitutes, to one of the most desirable places to live, work, shop, play, pray, and learn in the District of Columbia. I've helped to channel over $3.5 billion worth of investment into the neighborhood, created thousands of new units of housing, renovated hundreds of units of affordable housing, and also attracted over 400 new small, primarily independent businesses to the neighborhood. In the process, we were able to get recognition as one of the best revitalization stories in the entire country, receiving a national award, because we were able to do all this without the kind of displacement that usually is associated with the type of revitalization that we've experienced here. I want to help bring that same approach to neighborhoods that are still waiting after decades of promises for the kinds of amenities and the cleaner, safer communities that other neighborhoods already enjoy. So my proven leadership over the past 20 years has resulted in citywide benefits like the brand new, about to open Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library, which we almost lost had it not been for my advocacy. I've worked on preservation issues and library issues throughout the city that have benefited our residents. But right now I want to focus on, number one, affordable housing, because I have the experience to make sure that we maximize our investments in creating new affordable housing, and in helping our businesses, especially small businesses, survive the COVID-19 challenge, in addition to making sure that all of our neighborhoods have the type of development and improvements that they're hoping for. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Padro. I believe we are still missing the sixth candidate, Franklin Garcia, unless he's here. He's not here. Okay, so we will begin the Q&A portion of the forum. I think I'm waiting for everyone else to show up on my screen, right? Okay, there's Mr. Padro, Mr. Lazier, Mr. J. Rahman, Mr. Goodwin. We're missing Mr. Batchelor, I believe. There he is. Okay. So we're about to go into the Q&A portion of the forum. I guess I would just remind all the candidates to, if you don't mind, muting yourself so that there's no feedback when others are talking. So most of these questions will be for everyone. Some of them will be just for a few people. If you hear a question and I don't call on you, just raise your hand, and I'll see if I can give you a chance to answer. I'm just gonna go in random order for who gets to answer this first question first. I guess we'll start with let's start with Alexander Padro. So with the economic downturn caused by COVID-19, the district government has made tough funding decisions this budget cycle, and that likely will continue into the future. What areas do you see that are ripest for cuts in the DC budget, and where do you see opportunities to raise revenue?
So in terms of cuts, there are a number of major projects that are not moving forward at an adequate pace or have been delayed for a long time, and we can certainly reconsider those. Those would include the Macmillan renovation project, development project, and also the streetcar. Those are two very prominent examples. I think it would be important to make sure that we shore up our commercial property tax base and our sales tax base by temporarily reducing the amount of the commercial property taxes that are being collected from retailers. If they can only have 30% or 50% of their capacity, then they should only be paying that amount of their property taxes. We can't afford to give them a complete pass on property taxes, but if we can reduce that, we can save many of the businesses that generate jobs, as well as sales tax revenue and property tax revenue for the city. So those are a couple of my suggestions.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelor, same question. Do you need it repeated?
No, sure. No, I appreciate the question. I think that a good legislator will tell you that you've got to get in and look at the information in front of you and look at the latest information. And I know between now and when I join the council, there'll be plenty of revenue estimates to look at. And so we've got to do that first and foremost. But I'll say, I think some of it is about spending less, and we'll have to cut out waste and identify where it is. But some of it is also about spending smarter. As vice president of the State Board of Education, I run a small independent agency in the district who had to face a 40% shortfall in our non-personnel dollars, which could have side-railed our priorities or forced, like the council did, to balance the budget on the back of working class folks, and namely public employees through DC government. What we did instead was figure out how to spend smarter, how to still stay true to our goals, how to streamline the services and the projects that we were planning on doing, while also making sure that our employees had a cost of living increase. That's the type of pragmatic leadership that I'll have from the council. I'll use the best information that's in front of me. And quite frankly, if all else fails, it always seems like Events DC has some money lying around. So we can see what they're up to in the new year.
Thank you, Mr. Batchelor. Mr. J. Raman, same question to you. What areas are ripest for cuts, and how would you raise revenue?
I think the easiest way to raise revenue is to put people back to work and put DC residents back to work, number one. I ran the Youth Build program at the Latin American Youth Center, where we trained young people who had dropped out of high school or were about to be court involved in construction and got them a GED. I think every crane I see that's up in the sky is an opportunity to put people back to work. If we can put more DC residents back to work, we will raise our income tax revenues within the city. As far as cuts, I believe that just like what I do with my own budget, I look inside to see where I can make cuts, and we need to do the same. The district council has, for too long, not looked at oversight to see whether the laws that they've passed actually work and do what they do. It gets added on, and our agencies work in silos. It takes 3 times the number of people to get one thing done. And what it does is they become an obstacle for us everyday citizens to get things done, than be a partner in success.
Thank you. Mr. Goodwin, same question to you.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Yeah, so we certainly need to focus on cuts and adding revenue to help deal with this budget shortfall, which is currently projected to be $770 million, but could very well grow. I would say that I would like to cut a lot of the non-essential capital projects. There's a lot of DPR investments and renovations, such as libraries, that I think are non-essential in a time like now because we're not even able to use these properties. I would definitely cut the $118 million slated for investment in the Benning streetcar extension. Those dollars can be reallocated a lot more efficiently to our most desperate and dire needs and for our neediest residents. I would also cut ineffective government programs. We have so many programs I can think of specifically through DOES that are government contracts that are really 8-figure numbers we're investing that are not yielding direct results. So I'd like to perform a thorough audit on these government agencies like DOES that's having 7-8-figure government contracts going out to ensure that we get some return on it. I'd add revenue by both strategic property disposition and property rental of district-owned properties, as well as getting our underemployed populations to work, teaching them certification skills so that they can be carpenters, electricians, plumbers. This is the kind of work that I've done, and this is the kind of innovative thinking that I bring to the council to help us get economically back on track.
Thank you. And Mr. Lazier.
Great, thank you for that question. So, I've spent the last 2 decades digging in the city's budget to find ways to fund things that matter to all of us, and particularly to find ways to protect services when times are tough like they are now. And that's where I want to start, is at a time when so many families are struggling to pay their bills, at a time when businesses are worried about going out of business, at a time when students don't have technology and internet at home. It's a wrong time to be thinking about cutting services. It's really the right time to be talking about what we can do to keep money in people's pockets, to keep businesses afloat and help students. And that's what I would aim to do. I would use my skills like digging in the city's budget to close loopholes. 2 years ago, I identified a corporate tax loophole that had cost the city $1 billion over 20 years and hadn't done anything to expand the city's economy. And I pushed to get those tax subsidies closed. And we used all the savings to invest in schools, to invest in ending homelessness, to invest in helping people replace lead pipes in their homes. I would continue to do that. I also would use the city's reserves more than we have. We have barely tapped into our reserves, and I cannot imagine a more rainy day than what we're in right now. In terms of cuts, there is one area where I would cut, and that is our police budget. I've been saying for years that we spend more on police per capita than any large U.S. city, and it's not creating safety in our community. It's in fact creating harm. I would cut.
Thank you, Mr. Lazier. Sorry, I forgot to mention everyone has a minute to answer these questions.
Okay, I was going to ask you that question because I didn't know how long.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I'll cut you off when you get to a minute. So the next question here is.
Can I add one? Can I add one thing just because I didn't know? I'll just say it in like 10 seconds. Yeah, I'm also comfortable raising taxes on our highest income residents, which I don't think anybody else said. We need to raise taxes on our folks who are doing well in this pandemic so we can help those who are not.
Sure, and that wasn't the next question I had on my list, but as long as you raised it, let's hear from everyone else what they think about that. Starting with Mr. Batchelor, what do you think of Mr. Lazier's proposition to raise taxes on did you give a percentage or?
I mean, I would just, a poll was done this spring showing that most DC residents would support raising taxes on families with incomes above $250,000. So I would probably start somewhere around then. And
the council bill, I believe, was at $250,000 to raise taxes on those folks. Mr. Batchelor.
Yeah, so I'd be in support of the council amendment to the budget that would have done that. I think, like I said before, in a budget season where we chose to balance the books on the backs of working class folks, where we decided to cheat district government employees out of a cost of living increase, those folks who make our city run, instead of asking the wealthiest to pitch in a marginal part of their income to really make sure that we could stay afloat and support all of those essential services that make our city go, I think it's criminal and something that clearly I would work to reverse from the council.
Thank you. Mr. Goodwin, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's really bad policy. It's probably from a point of privilege that Mr. Lazier can say that because it wouldn't affect him. But frankly, that would cause a lot of people to vote with their feet. And 1% more of $0 is $0. Meaning if someone leaves the district as a consequence of negative, really regressive tax policy, we're going to be shooting ourselves in the foot. And that's the reality that we're facing. So it sounds good, it's optimistic, but it's really not based in or grounded in a real sense of what people are going to do as a consequence of higher taxes. We've already started to see people who are in this tax income bracket leave the district, and we're losing those income taxes that we could otherwise be generating. So I think it's horrible policy. I think we have to think very thoughtful about what kind of district we're creating. And we don't want to run people who are employers or entrepreneurs out of the district.
Thank you. Ed, I'll give you a chance to respond, but I want to hear from Mr. Jayaraman and Mr. Pedro first. Mr. Jayaraman?
Yeah, I think those who make that are really small business owners, and they are struggling right now and just to make ends meet. And so saying that they are super wealthy or calling them criminals is just not the right frame to put this in. The reality is that we're all hurting. We need to come back together. We need to create jobs, and we need to support our small businesses so they can hire back the people that lost their jobs or were furloughed in this time. So it is not the right time to say, oh, we need to raise taxes on those to pay for other things. I think we need to look internally and say, where do we cut? I mean, where do we find that rent? We can. There's a lot of bloated bureaucracy in the city, and I've seen it, and I hear it every day where people can't get things done. That's where we need to start. And we don't need to start with raising taxes first.
Thank you. Mr. Pedro?
I would be very leery of raising taxes at this particular time, with the exception of perhaps an emergency assessment. This is an emergency. I could see a modest additional tax on high earners, but something that we could reverse at a later date after the district's finances have returned to what we would consider normal. But as others have said, the council can do a lot more in terms of oversight on our existing spending to make sure that we're getting the bang for our buck. We've got a number of areas where we spend significant dollars that aren't generating the kinds of returns that we'd like to see. With additional oversight, we'd be able to better spend the dollars that we have without having a knee-jerk reaction of looking at tax cuts. We've come a long way as a district in terms of balancing our budget from the days of the control board, and I think that by prudent budget and oversight, we can avoid becoming known as a tax and spend jurisdiction.
Thank you. And Mr. Lazier, 30 seconds, your response to Mr. Goodwin's assertion that your suggestion comes from a place of privilege, I believe, was what he said.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I appreciate the question because it really shows where the different candidates stand. And I'm not sure in the middle of a pandemic when some people kept their jobs and their high incomes, we would want to protect them while people are suffering in the city. The main thing I would want to say is that Marcus is just wrong that people leave. There's just research over and over and over again that high income, when we raise taxes on high income people don't move because they're attached to wherever they live. They're attached to the district. It's also worth noting that millionaires in the district currently pay a tax rate that is less than 0.5% higher than people who make $60,000 a year. The notion that we can't afford to stretch that out and really have a progressive tax system, I just find, just totally wrong.
Thank you. This next question, I'm going to start with, I think, Mr. Goodwin. The council passed a sweeping but temporary police reform bill earlier this year, and will take up a permanent version of that legislation this fall. Do you believe that emergency goes far enough or too far? And what are your priorities for police reform, if any?
Thank you. I'm really happy that we passed the emergency legislation because we are long overdue for profound police reform in the district. Growing up as a young Black man in the district, I grew up afraid of police, with an antagonistic relationship between us and them in the community. When I was 13 years old, I was tackled to the ground in Adams Morgan and brought into the 3D police station because I matched the description of someone who was wanted for a shooting. I wasn't the person they were looking for, but I know that racial profiling has had a terrible impact on the psyche of many people who grew up like me and my peers. So I want to train police to de-escalate conflict in community. I want them to end racial profiling as a practice in the department. I agree with banning the chokehold as presented by Charles Allen. I want to expand the officer-friendly program to create a community trust and collaborate in community engagement with our youth so that they know that the police work for them. I finally want to expand funding in violence interruption programs because I know how critically important it is to have community members engaged in our public safety solutions.
Thank you. Mr. Pedro?
I'm not one of the folks that is looking to defund the police, but I do believe that there is a reform that is needed. In terms of the number of officers that we have currently, I think that if we had fewer officers, we wouldn't be able to do things like the fall crime initiative that we had last year, where in my community, we were able to see additional officers actually have an impact on making our streets safer for all residents of all ethnic backgrounds and all economic strata. We have opportunities to try to move some of the responsibilities that police officers generally are tasked with that don't require armed officers. And very importantly, I believe that we need to incentivize officers to actually live in the District of Columbia, because the best officers that I've seen over my 20 years as a public servant have always been the ones that actually live in the community, they understand the community, and as a result, they're more sensitive, to the community. So reform, yes.
Thank you.
No.
Mr. Lazier, same question to you on police reform.
Sure. Well, I'm definitely in the camp that I believe it is time to defund the Metropolitan Police Department and refund the savings to the community. I think Deon Kay's shooting at the hands of police less than 2 weeks ago was unavoidable and tragic. The fact that he was tracked down by police and then they chased him down, shot him within just a few seconds of them getting out of their car with an officer having a gun pointed. It was clearly a moment of escalation rather than a thoughtful moment of how to intervene in a child's life when they have something going wrong, that they have a gun. So I am very much in support of reducing the size of our police force and investing more in things that we know keep our community healthy and safe, like affordable housing and mental health services and after-school programs. I would like to see us shift things that are provided by police that they don't have to be doing, like dealing with people who have mental health problems or dealing with traffic incidents, and shift those to other agencies and other DC government workers. And I also support community-based mediation, like violence interruption services. Let's let the community figure out its problems, not send in armed police who we know are just often resulting in tragic deaths in our community.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelor.
Sure. So yes, I believe that we need to defund the police and reinvest in those things that truly secure safety for our communities. Deon Kay was shot on the block that I grew up on. And what is the most tragic is that it's easier for kids like Deon in neighborhoods like ours to have access to a gun than to have access to opportunity. And now that we have this once in a lifetime, once in a generation opportunity to truly reimagine what public safety looks like and how we secure it, any half step is derelict on any leadership that gets elected to this position come January. And so I'll make sure that we reinvest deeply in violence prevention work, because I've done that work on the ground, but that we also expand school and community-based mental health supports, that we make sure that we raise the economic floor through a guaranteed income program for our poorest residents, that we equitably fund schools like the ones Deon went to, so that the only answer isn't a gun. And those things take for sure the experience to get those things done, but also takes the experience I've had bringing broad coalitions together to have those tough conversations.
Mr. J. Rahman, same question to you.
Thank you so much. Let's get to the heart of the issue. It's gun violence and homicides. That's where we're at greater than a 10-year high in homicides across the city. And we need to get guns off our streets. And we need to increase our intervention to keep guns out. And then we need to enlist the help of churches and pastors to get guns off our streets. I'd be willing to pay more for each gun and enlist pastors who can do that. We also need to retrain some of our officers to be what I call de-escalators. We used to have those in our city, where our officers who are unarmed could go to a scene and attempt to be the first ones to de-escalate the situation before it went wrong. And I think that's what we need to do. But more than that, we need to get to the underlying causes of gun violence, which is a lack of economic independence. That's vocational education in our schools and paid job training.
Thank you. This next question, I think I just I want you to raise your hands. I'm going to steal this this method from Fennett from yesterday evening's panel. So by just a show of hands, do you believe that Mayor Muriel Bowser is doing a good job? Yes. Raise your hand if yes. Leave your hand down if no. Okay, so it looks like Mr. Pedro, Mr. J. Rahman, and Mr. Goodwin believe that the mayor is doing a good job, although Mr. Pedro is a little iffy on that. How about the same question for Police Chief Peter Newsham? Raise your hand if yes. Keep your hand down if no. Mr. J. Rahman believes he is. Nobody else believes Peter Newsham is doing a good job as police chief. Okay, let's dig into that a little bit. Mr. J. Rahman, would you like to explain your answer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to really look at what we call our police to do. Too often, we've put so much on their plate and moved away from the core functions. When I convened ANC Commission from across the city and brought in the deputy police chief and deputy mayor for public safety and council members together, it was amazing. They all came to a consensus that we really need to reimagine policing. And I think we need to call on other agencies to do more, to provide the services that are needed within their city, in the streets, when it's happening, when it's needed, and not just throw it all on the police, because that's what happens right now. Other agencies check out at 5 o'clock and they say, call the police. And that's absolutely wrong. And if we can fix that, I think we'll have a much better, much safer, much healthier city.
Thank you. Mr. Goodwin, would you like to explain your answer?
Yeah, it's very apparent that DC police have had far too many incidents where violent interactions have occurred. Earlier, the unfortunate passing of Deon Kay was spoken about, and he certainly seems as though he were disposing of his weapon, and he was shot on sight without hesitation by an officer, just as a reaction, an instant flinch from the officer. So for a police chief who stands by DC police that's beating up peaceful protesters, a police chief who stands by the violence and violent actions against members of our community, has over-policed and under-policed communities in ways that have been really harmful to the lives of African Americans across the district, and really carried on the negative police practices of the era that I grew up in Washington. I don't see him doing enough to keep that job, and certainly not enough to serve the people of the district effectively. So I would not stand by his performance, especially over the past 9 months, which have been reflective of a lot of his time before then as well.
Thank you.
It's clear you've never been in the ride along.
You've never been black in DC.
Moving on to the previous question about Mayor Muriel Bowser, I'd like to hear from Mr. Pedro, who was a little hesitant to his answer of support for her.
So I think that there are ways that Mayor Bowser, has been a great leader. I guess the best demonstration is the current COVID-19 crisis. I think that that she's been exemplary in terms of leaders nationwide. As the equivalent of our governor, I've seen the kind of leadership that has helped control, the outbreak here in the District of Columbia. In other ways, I have found her leadership to be less vigorous and less creative. I found out of all the mayors that we've had, she's the mayor that has a least of a connection, with our communities. She doesn't spend the amount of time that previous mayors have spent in the community. It hasn't been as accessible, and as a result, is often thought of as being, insensitive, to the needs of a variety of different populations in our city.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Lazier, you did not raise your hand in support of the job Mayor Muriel Bowser is doing. Can you explain?
Sure. So, yes and no questions are hard because nothing is just like cut and dried. But I will say that there are some things that I'm really proud that the mayor has taken on. She really championed closing DC General Shelter and opening up smaller facilities across the city, even when communities resisted. So I think her work on homelessness is commendable. But there are just so many other areas where I feel like she's falling short. I do not believe that she is a supporter of reimagining how we create public safety in the city and has resisted legislation that already has passed to do that. I believe that, I'm frustrated that she opposed the paid family and medical leave law, which brings benefits to families with new children who need to take time off with a sick relative, that I was a champion of and helped advocate for passage of. She earlier this summer opposed raising taxes on our highest income residents. There are just a number of ways in which I feel the mayor is not moving the city forward. I'm frustrated at how she creates a lack of transparency in DC public schools, saying all summer long that kids had enough technology, they had enough technology, only to show in the summer that 60% did not.
And Mr. Goodwin, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this question. I think you raised your hand in support of Mayor Muriel Bowser.
I think all of us would agree that Mayor Bowser is the toughest job that any mayor in the history of the District of Columbia has ever had, especially right now. I think she's managed it gracefully, all things considered, certainly because she's had to stand up to the most deplorable president in recent memory in the United States of America, if not ever, and has done that masterfully, better than any other mayor in the entire country. She's also, I think, and I think everyone here has probably credited her for balancing a budget in the midst of one of the largest economic crises of the past century, and delivered a balanced budget to the council with minor tweaks and modifications to ensure that the budget remained balanced and we're flexible enough to respond to any ongoing economic pain that would lower our future projected revenues.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry.
The next question here, Mr. Batchelor, sorry, you wanted a chance?
Well, yeah, I'll just say very quickly, I dare to think, that this is the toughest position any mayor has been in. I would venture to say that when I was born in this city, right, governing a city that was both the crack and murder capital of the world on the verge of financial ruin is a pretty tough position to be in, and inheriting a city that was inherently prosperous, but also had such deep challenges with inequality. Not leaning into that, I think, is a sign that we could have used bolder leadership on a number of different issues, from education to affordable housing, and not to mention transparency and accountability. But we've got to have more folks on the council who are going to hold our entire government to a higher standard of providing for our residents. And I think that's the focus of so many of us in this race for the council this year.
Thank you. Okay, so this next question here, I think I'd like to start with, we'll start with Mr. Goodwin this time. Should the council expand DC's rent control law or keep it the way it is?
I think we have to be very thoughtful about expanding it. We certainly need to have more units under rent control across the district. It's an incredible institution that we've taken, inspired by New York City, here to ensure that we have more units where people are allowed to have a fixed cost of living in spite of the rising cost of living that's spread across the district. But what I do want to see is laws that allows us to right-size units, because I've spoken to many property owners who have a 3-bedroom unit where maybe a single mother is there with children, but the children grow out of the unit. And then the mother is there with the fixed cost of rent control with a 3-bedroom to herself, which is inefficient to the greater market. So we need to be able to move people around flexibly so that our units of rent control meet the market demand and the real market need, so that our supply isn't constrained because people are not allowed to be moved from one rent controlled unit to another.
Thank you. Mr. Lazier, your answer to that question: should DC expand its rent control law?
Absolutely. Rent control creates stability for every single renter in the city. It helps stop gentrification. It means that the protections that you have if you're a homeowner with a fixed mortgage also apply to being a renter. And that's incredibly important. That's security and stability from having stable rent. I think everyone needs to understand that our rent control law was passed decades ago and only covers buildings built before 1975. So every year, the number of units and the share of apartments covered by rent control declines. We know that rent control has huge loopholes that allow landlords to get out of rent control by creating things known as voluntary agreements. We know that there are other loopholes like allowing vacant units rents to jump dramatically. So I am in partnership with a campaign called Reclaim Rent Control that I was part of when I was at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute that calls for comprehensive reform of rent control to cover more units, to limit rent increases, and to close loopholes that landlords are shamefully abusing right now to take advantage of tenants.
Thank you. This next question, I think I want to start with Mr. Batchelor. DC, like many jurisdictions, is grappling with how to safely and equitably educate its students. Should students return to in-person learning? Should schools remain 100% virtual? How would you craft the ideal pandemic learning environment?
I don't think there is an ideal pandemic learning environment, right? Which is why we've got to really work as hard as we can to make sure that we're flattening the curve, that we make sure that the science actually lines up with what we're saying, and that we return both our students and our educators to the classroom as quickly but as safely as possible. In the interim, we still have important work to do from the council to make sure that we're bridging the digital divide, that students who need not just the technology, but also need the instruction to be literate in using that technology, get the support they need, and that support also extends to their families. It also means that we've got to explore creative ways to do hub-based and outdoor learning in an equitable way that opens up those opportunities, especially for students east of the Anacostia River. And then in the meantime, while we're preparing, we need to make sure that our school system has the funding it needs to fix HVAC systems, to retrofit school buildings, and to do all of those things that will make a return back to the classroom in person more possible this time.
Thank you. Mr. J. Rahman, same question to you.
Thank you very much. I've been in the field of emergency planning for the past 18 years. I helped finalize the DC's pandemic plan, and currently helping childcare centers to reopen. So there's a process and procedures in place, and they are opening up safely. I think we need to do the same for our schools. And I think there's 3 steps you can do. 1, keep COVID out. And that you can do that with testing every day and making sure our staff are safe. 2, making sure you limit the amount of movement within a school, and so that the students stay within their classrooms, and teachers would move from classroom to classroom because we know they are apt to comply. And 3, what happens if COVID is identified? And my previous idea of keeping students in classroom will limit exposure. And I think we can do those things. I think we need to do those things for our schools to reopen. But beyond that, I think we have a real opportunity where we blend in-person learning with virtual learning so that the virtual part becomes a supplement to what they learn in class. And so it's really flipping education system in the other way around.
Thank you. Mr. Pedro, would you like to answer this question as well?
I'm actually not in favor of bringing students back into classrooms for in-person instruction until the vaccine has been widely disseminated. I believe that there's just too much risk of increased spread of the infections by virtue of having sensitive populations further exposed by having kids going back and forth in class, being exposed to staff and teachers, taking the virus back to sensitive elders in their households. So I believe that it is best to wait until we can truly safely bring everyone back into
this next question comes from Mr. J. Rahman. You have something to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think parents are going to make that decision, and they should make that decision based on what's going on within their own family. They're going to make the decision about, I wouldn't want to get into what their underlying conditions are, but there are a lot of students and a lot of parents who are trying to juggle working full time and with 2 and 3 kids, that it's just not fair that they're not able to do it. And I think we need to be able to help accommodate those in a reasonable way, and I think we can do it. And I'm the person who knows how to guide this and how to lead it and make sure what it looks like is going to work. And there's a lot of studies out there that says we can do it already.
Thank you. This next question comes from looks like it was submitted to us by a viewer. It says, now more than ever, great parks and public spaces are a thriving part of the neighborhood. In Southwest, Landsberg Park and the Duck Pond are getting improvements. King Greenleaf Recreation Center is slated for upgrade, and the Southwest Branch Library is being rebuilt with additional outdoor green space. What will you do to prioritize public parks and green spaces in Southwest and across the city? I think I want to start with Mr. Lazier on this one.
Great, thanks for that question. Well, some of my favorite places in the District of Columbia are outdoor green spaces. I love Kingman Park, Kingman Island, I should say. I love the Arboretum. And, in my own neighborhood, as you go towards the metro, there's a green near the Brookline Metro. And, in a city that is growing, development pressures continue to try to squeeze in on and reduce our green space. And I just think we need to resist that and make sure, whether it is the Brookline Green at the Brookline Metro or McMillan Reservoir, we just need to fight to make sure that development in the city is balanced, that we are developing for people, and for homes and retail, but also that we are preserving green space in the city, particularly at a time when this pandemic is showing that being outside is the thing that keeps us sane and is something that is safe for us to do. Let's just make sure that we are finding ways for people to be outside, to walk, and to enjoy the green space in the city. And that means investing in parks and other green spaces.
Thank you. Mr. Goodwin, same question to you.
I very much agree with Mr. Lazier on this one, because I do believe the great outdoors should be preserved and protected. And right now, with the Greenleaf redevelopment of 493 units, I want us to see and ensure that there is a profound community benefits agreement that is agreed to by the district and by the developer that promises 1-for-1 unit replacement before any single person has to leave the property. We need to see and ensure that everyone has a unit that's a replacement unit available in the District of Columbia. We saw in the Berry Farm redevelopment proposal that some of the people were put in units in Maryland. So I want to see everyone put in units in the district, and that a community vetted plan and a community benefits agreement that supports neighborhood organizations is presented there, as well as all of the other great development going on in Southwest, because the economic prominence cannot leave people behind, and it cannot disrupt housing or people's quality of life in the district.
Thank you. This next question, I think I'd like to hear from each of you, but I would ask that you try and keep your answers to just 30 seconds. I'm stealing this one again from my counterpart at the Post, Fennett, who moderated last night. The question is, a lot of influence flows from council committees and the council committee chair. That's where a council member derives most of his or her authority. If elected, what committee would you like to chair and why? And I'd like to hear first from Mr. Batchelor.
That's a tough one. I think there are a lot of big issues to tackle in our city's future. But I think I have for sure the most direct experience in public education, but also would like to take a swing at housing. I think we could have a better housing committee chair than the one we have now, and a more and a better focus on really producing and preserving deeply affordable housing. And I'd love to do that work. And then obviously I've also had experience working in job development, especially around our young people.
Thank you.
So would also love to take a swing at labor and workforce.
Mr. Pedro, which committee and why?
Either economic development or housing. Those are two of the areas that I have the most experience in, and I believe that I can bring the most creative approaches to both making sure that we extend economic development throughout our city, especially parts of the city that haven't seen it, east of the river especially, but also we're not getting our dollars worth in terms of the investments that we're making in affordable housing. A lot more thought needs to be given, and a lot more oversight to make sure that we generate the number of units that are going to be necessary to make sure that we have a thriving city in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Lazier, which committee and why?
Sure. So I'll just start by saying I feel like the council has really currently strong leadership in some committees that I'm very interested in, like Human Services and the Labor Committee. I'm very interested in affordable housing and have been my entire career, although I really think the answers for affordable housing are known. We just need to spend more money to create more affordable housing. So I do end up, the residual, the place I really think needs the most help in the city is education. It's the committee that excites me the most because we know inequities are so deep and haven't gotten better because there are issues of lack of transparency and coordination between public charter schools and DCPS. It's just a really important challenge that I would be eager to tackle.
Thank you. Mr. J. Rahman, same question to you.
Thank you for that. I would pick government operations. As a council member, I'm going to give you one number, mine. And in the process of helping you get things done, I'm going to find out where the bottlenecks are, where the problems are that can be addressed by legislation. Again, I think our agencies work in silos, and in helping you solve your problem, I'm going to learn where the problem is within our agencies and solve them. And I think that's the way to do it.
Thank you. And I believe, Mr. Goodwin, you're the final. Oh, we lost you. I guess he doesn't want to chair a committee. No, I'm kidding. Okay, we'll give Mr. Goodwin a chance to answer that if and when he comes back. But we have another question here submitted in the comments. Should the district guarantee a right to legal representation in eviction cases? How about, well, there's Mr. Goodwin. Okay, he's back. So we'll go back. Mr. Goodwin, your answer to your preferred committee and what? Lost him again. Damn.
Sorry. Okay, sorry, I was backstage. The two committees would be first finance and revenue. The second would be housing. With regards to finance and revenue, I've interacted a lot with the committee, and I know that some tax increment financing or tax abatement bills have not paid back on schedule or on time. Some have done so. I have the financial expertise to put together, see, and understand what a financial model means to know if we could get a better deal for the dollars that we're investing up front. When I talk about housing, I have the most profound experience in building and delivering affordable housing units, both by using Housing Production Trust Fund dollars, but also with the DC Open Doors and the HPAP programs. So I'd like to reform and revise those programs to get more value for DC residents.
Thank you. Okay, this next question comes from in the comments. It's from a viewer. Should the district guarantee a right to legal representation in eviction cases? Mr. Pedro, you're up.
I think the answer is short on that, and absolutely. I mean, I've worked with residents that have faced eviction, often, because of misunderstandings or landlords that haven't been sensitive to some particular circumstances, and it can be a struggle to find legal representation pro bono for tenants in those situations. So I think that should be a guaranteed right, and the government should be responsible for providing.
Thank you. And perhaps a better way to ask it is, does anyone disagree with that people in the district should have that right?
I don't disagree, but I would like to make an added comment if I could, Mitch.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the question isn't just legal representation, but what do we actually do to stop evictions from happening in the first place? Because I'm deeply, deeply worried that when this eviction moratorium ends and all the back rent that people have not been able to pay comes due, because it will come due, that we're going to face a crush of evictions. I believe it's a third of DC residents are at risk of being evicted, and we just need a plan to stop that from happening. And legal representation is not enough. I believe we actually need to ban evictions for the pandemic period. No one should lose their home because the economy was closed down around them. And we may need to help landlords who suffer as a result of that, but we just need to stop evictions from happening because they are so traumatic, and it's so unfair right now in the middle of the pandemic to think that someone could lose their home because their job disappeared through absolutely no fault of their own.
Thank you. Mr. J. Rahman, you had some thoughts, and I'm curious of also your thoughts on Mr. Lazier's assertion that we should ban evictions through the course of the pandemic.
Sure, I think legal representation is important because the contracts are so complicated. I think representation on the front end when you enter into a lease so that a renter or tenant knows what they're getting into is also equally as important as preventing eviction. I think a complete ban on evictions, while it sounds great, and Mr. Lazier, every program, everything he talks about is we're going to pay for this, the government's going to pay for it. And I honestly think that, that's a form of, he wants to pay for everything. We just don't have the money to pay for it all. And I think we need to be more, conservative in terms of how we spend our money. Are we getting the best out of what we're already spending? We don't have it. And so the calls to just spend money is irresponsible and will put us back into the control board. And then we don't want to see that. And that's exactly what's going to happen if Ed has his way.
Thank you. We have another, Ed, I'll give you a chance to respond to that in a second. We have another question from the comments here. Stuart Carafa is wondering, do the rest of the candidates, I guess excluding Mr. Jayraman, who just answered, do the rest of the candidates support banning evictions as Ed has suggested? Looks like Mr. Batchelor does, Mr. Pedro does, Mr. Goodwin?
Certainly, I think that banning evictions through the end of this year is something that we have agreed upon and makes sense. But really, at some point, we have to be thoughtful and sensible about people who own property. A vast majority of property owners in the district are small property owners, families who maybe have bought a home and then moved on to buy another home and rent it out. And for many of our seniors, it's their sole or one of their sole sources of income beyond their retirement income. So I really don't want to continue to put them in a compromising position, which they have been and can do so for a while, but not without any end. We're all in a pact as a society that to receive goods, you have to pay a price. Otherwise, no one would work if we never had to pay for anything. We don't live in a fantasy land. We live in a land with economic realities. So that's what I base my decisions in. So I do know that we need to extend to the point that we can't extend anymore, where we have to put a fixed end to things so that there's a societal expectation to start paying and get our economy back on track.
Thank you. Okay, this next question. Oh, sorry, Ed, I forgot. Go ahead.
So that sounds like Marcus does not support banning eviction permanently. And the economic reality, Marcus, is that the economy was shut down and income just disappeared and people are never going to be able to pay their back rent. That's the economic reality that we need to deal with, and the reality that thousands of people could be evicted, which would be devastating. And Chandra, I've been monitoring the city's finances for 20 years. I've never proposed anything that was irresponsible or out of balance. Why do you think I would want to support a control board coming back to the city? I've balanced my own budget, my own organization's budget as a nonprofit for 20 years. I'm no interest in the city being tanked financially, but I do know that we can make smarter financial decisions to spend our money better and not just cut services, including raising taxes if we need to support services in the pandemic.
Thank you.
Can I quickly respond to that? 30 seconds.
I'll give Marcus 30 seconds and then Mr. Jayraman, you're next. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's patently false, Ed, because you have time and time again encouraged the district to spend down its reserves. And if the city had taken your advice around the mortgage foreclosure collapse, the city would have gone back to a control board in 2009 or 2010. So it's patently false to say that you haven't proposed really poor advice in terms of the city's financial position. You also strongly oppose the Nationals ballpark, which up until this year had been paying back ahead of schedule and has been an economic boon to the Southeast Navy Yard community. Everyone would agree. And actually, the numbers are borne out due to the latest CFO's report. So you've had some really bad takes, and this is another one.
Mr. Jayraman, you wanted to chime in here?
Yeah, I think fiscal policy, and so he said produces all these figures, but it's questions he created. You can make questions to say pretty much whatever you wanted to say, and that's what's happened. Whether it's raising taxes on people making over $250 or saying I'm looking at the budget. No, every program he says we've got to spend money, we've got to spend money, we've got to spend money, but we don't have it. That's the bottom line, and so we need to maintain fiscal restraint. And we need to focus on addressing COVID and getting through this together. And that's what's important, and not just spend ourselves into a state where we're going to end up, our children are going to have to be paying back so much money that we don't have.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelor, yes.
Could I just say very quickly, we're not getting through this together right now. I mean, there are folks who get to work from home and are still making their salary, and folks like my mom who are going to work as a home health aide every day without union protection, who has to buy PPE out of pocket, who still can't get a day off if she's sick, and just gets enough money to make the ends meet at the end of the day. We're not getting through this pandemic together. And if we don't put our dollars to work, if we don't make this $16.5 billion operation move for the folks left furthest behind, and not continue to underinvest or disinvest in communities like mine for the sake of fiscal restraint, we're going to lose an entire segment of our city. And so we're talking about businesses and the extra rich walking away. 25,000 Black people have involuntarily walked away from this city over the next 2 decades. And if we don't do something about that, if we don't build economic security, right, then what does the future of our city look like anyway? And so, you know, I just wanted to say that, Mitch, because quite frankly, out of deep frustration, I don't understand why we're acting like all boats are rising with the tide and we're doing this fine in this pandemic, because quite frankly, there are some people on dry land and some people, namely the folks that I represent, who are drowning. And the more we stand in our boats and watch people drown and say we can't afford to go help them, the longer we'll drive our city into a place that can't be one that works for all of us.
This next question here comes from, looks like another viewer submitted question about gun violence. Gun violence has plagued our city this year. In Southwest, it has taken an incredible toll on our young people. What solutions can you provide legislatively to change this paradigm? Mr. Padro, I want to hear from you first.
So I think we do need to make investments in alternative violence prevention programs. I think one of the best that I've seen over the years is called The Tale of the Tape, where Curtis Mosey, a documentarian, is actually documented on videotape the lives and the passing of hundreds of young people due to primarily gun violence. And then he's gone out to schools and recreation centers and presented those stories and left the young people in tears and pledging never to become involved in gun violence. So if we can find and fund programs like The Tale of the Tape, I think that we can have a definite impact on youth violence.
Thank you. Mr. Goodwin, would you like to answer this question? What legislative solutions do you have to gun violence?
We need to really get our young people in more productive, nurturing, and enriching environments. Right now, I walked by the Verizon Center today. What did I see? I saw 80 young people, look like they should have been in high school, if not middle school, hanging out on the steps by the portrait gallery. I want these people to be in environments where they can express themselves artistically, creatively, musically, and we currently don't have these spaces invested in enough, because currently we're seeing the consequences of not investing early enough. We need to get guns out of our community. We need to invest in our youth. We need to start putting them in environments that are more productive, that are safer, that the community can be surrounding them with. Because right now, the most likely victim and perpetrator of a gun crime are young urban youth. And I want to see and ensure that that's changed going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Lazier.
So I know a young man from DC who's now married, and he's had a stable job for over a decade, and he's leading a really wonderful life. And as a teenager, he had a gun for a short period of time. And I just think we have to ask, why do good kids carry guns sometimes? Why do kids in traumatized communities of color, Black and brown communities, often feel like they need to have a gun, that they do not feel safe or they do not feel powerful, and then address that. And so the real solution is, what do we do to invest in low-income kids to help them feel that a sense of worth and give them a sense of opportunity and a better path? And you know, what can they expect, or what do you expect them to think when they see the city gentrifying, they see it getting nicer for some people and not for them, not for their families, and that people don't seem to care, that people who look like them are getting pushed out of the city. So I really think it just is a matter of our city showing that we care about our youth, and that we invest in them, whether it's through schools, after-school programs, job training, whatever it is. We just need to really show our youth that we believe in them and that we want to give them opportunity and a path and an alternative to something like having a gun.
Thank you. Another viewer submitted question here. Oh, Marcus, you wanted to weigh in on.
Sorry, Mitch, you know I have to for sure. And I'll be quick. I'm in favor of making sure that we have a public health approach to our gun violence crisis. And that's not just about saying that guns end up in the hands of young urban youth. Let's specify it, right? Gun shooters and the victims of gun violence are young Black youth, which means we've got to focus on raising the economic floor for Black families in this city that gives our communities the type of safety and security that all of our young people need. Now, we for sure need rec centers and safe spaces for our young people, but just like it was for me in Congress Heights, the community should be a safe space for our young people. And the more we invest in making sure that we build and expand opportunity for the broader community, for these young people's families, invest in their education, the less likely it is that they'll engage in these acts. And for those young people that are, it's about targeting those communities. It's not an infinite amount of young people in Ward 8 doing the shooting. There's a finite amount. And if we target those families, those young people with the resources, access, and opportunity that they need, we bring down gun violence in our city exponentially. But we've chose to over-police those communities instead of investing in in their futures. And that's something I'll do differently from the council.
Thank you. Mr. J. Rahman, finish us off.
Yeah, within a block of my house here on Capitol Hill, one neighbor lost her only son to gun violence, and another young man who I was mentoring and helped to get a job and got involved in our ANC was shot twice. And, where was he? In the wrong place at the wrong time? Yes, which was his front porch. And, this is really, really sad because we're not providing the opportunities. When I talk to these young people, they say, Chander, you are asking me to make a choice between putting food on the table and getting training, which is why I am going to push for paid job training as I did at the Latin American Youth Center. We were able to pay them for the work that they did, so they didn't have to make the choice between putting food on the table and getting job training so they can get jobs. Like I said, every crane has an opportunity to put people back to work, and that's the easiest way to stop a bullet is a job.
Thank you. This next question, I'd like to just see a show of hands. Who are the candidates who are participating in the district's fair elections program, the publicly funded campaigns? Mr. J. Rahman, Mr. Batchelor, Mr. Lazier. So Mr. Padro, tell us why you are not participating in that program.
I threw my hat in the ring pretty late, and I didn't feel that it allowed me to be able to get the number of contributors in the time period to be able to get the match. So I did decide to forego the opportunity, though if I had started earlier, I absolutely would have participated.
Thank you. Mr. Goodwin, your explanation, please.
Yeah. There's only one candidate in this race who has more contributors than I do. That's Ed Lazier, who's done a phenomenal job. And I understand he's been a fundraiser as a lobbyist for the past 20 years. That said, I thought it was wholly selfish or irresponsible for me to take nearly $400,000 away from the district that needs funding so desperately to fund campaign posters and consultants in mail and Facebook ads. Maybe some other candidates think that money should go to politics, but I'm for getting money out of politics, and I'd rather raise it from private contributors. So that was my thinking there. And you can have the money. I'd rather the money go to public schools. Other people probably don't agree.
Thank you, Marcus. Mr. Lazier, your response to Marcus's description of you as a lobbyist and his position that public money should not be funding campaigns.
Oh yeah, lobbyist is not a bad word, and the DC Fiscal Policy Institute is registered as a lobbyist. If you're trying to influence legislation in the district, that's a lobbyist. So my guess is Mr. would try to do the same, then he was a lobbyist as well. That's a good word. I think trying to change policy is a great thing. So I'm proud to be a fair elections candidate because I think it actually gets money out of politics. As a candidate, I'm limited to asking people for no more than $100. I get no corporate contributions. I'm not asking for people for $1,000. The way that candidates outside of fair elections are. Money, bad money in politics is corporate influence, not public money. So the best opportunity to create democracy is to actually help people who do not have access to large dollar donors compete. And that's often young people, it's women of color. Fair elections is changing elections in the district. It helped Janice Lewis-George win her race in Ward 4 in the primary. And I think it's revolutionary in terms of expanding access to running for election and actually keeping big, powerful corporate money out of politics.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelor has something to say, it sounds like. Looks like.
Yeah, yeah. I'll just say, I'm in the fair elections program because, quite frankly, I think it's a better investment for the city to pay for a 4-month campaign and get the honest and bold leadership we need than to get robbed over the next 4 years. And that's why I'm in the fair elections program. It was the first citywide candidate to do it because I believe that it would give us, and it has given us, the freedom to run unapologetically centered in the issues of our communities and of the people, and not beholden on phone calls in big fundraisers with big dollar donors who, quite frankly, are currying influence. That's the reason that I'm in the program, and it's the reason I'll be the type of independent leader that DC residents need.
Thank you. Mr. J. Rahman, your thoughts?
Yeah, this is the Fair Elections program is what enabled people like me who are not independently wealthy to be able to live the American dream. I was born in India, grew up in Kansas, but I've lived here for 25 years. I'm a small business owner and elected official in the ANC. And without the Fair Elections program, I'm not sure I would have the connections like Mr. Goodwin has, getting $1,000 from the baseball and basketball and other folks that are, he's raising money hand over fist at $1,000 a pop. And I think this really allows for those people who truly want to represent the people to have a chance to be the right kind of representative that we need right now.
Thank you. This next question, let's see. I think I want to start with Mr. Goodwin. Do you support bringing back the Washington football team to DC using taxpayer-subsidized development?
No, in fact, we saw in Los Angeles, the LA Chargers billionaire owner brought the Los Angeles Chargers back from San Diego with his own money and with money from investors. We have the ability to have that done in the district because we have a billionaire owner of the Washington football team. While I do want to see football back played in Washington to bring those dollars back locally, I know there's a bigger conversation about RFK Stadium, which may or may not be a good site for it, because frankly, I think the community engagement that we've seen to redevelop the property for sports space, art space, creative space, green space, community space is probably a more appropriate solution. But we do want to see the economic revitalization of a community, potentially one east of the river, that I think bringing a football team and making it a comprehensive city property that could host concerts, citywide events like championships for our high school teams and other community events, as well as potentially Olympic or World Cup events going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Padro, I'm curious of your response to this question.
So I originally wasn't a supporter of the investment in the baseball stadium, and I thought it was rather outrageous that we're responsible for upgrading that facility at the whim of the owners of the team. But the economic impact that the baseball stadium has generated is undeniable. It's paid for itself and has generated a huge windfall for a city in terms of tax dollars. So while I certainly would encourage the owner of a football team, including the Washington football team, to build his own stadium, I would be in favor of public subsidies for infrastructure related to the project.
Thank you. All right. This next question here having to do with, Initiative 77, which the voters approved a few years ago before I arrived in the district, and the council then repealed, pertaining to the tipped minimum wage. So the question being, do you agree with the council's repeal of that initiative? And please explain your answer. Let's start with Mr. Lazier.
So I supported Initiative 77 to raise wages for hardworking tip workers in restaurants, including bussers and barbacks, the people who don't even directly serve people, but also people who work in nail salons and people who are hotel porters, hotel luggage carriers. And I thought it was shameful, totally shameful, that the council overruled the will of the people, even if they disagreed. It was the wrong thing for the council to overturn it. Let's just be clear. When you're making $5 an hour plus tips, which is currently what what happens for tip workers. If you're at a restaurant that's having a bad night or a bad season like right now, your income is incredibly low. We know that tipped workers, who are predominantly women and women of color, are more likely to go on public assistance and live in poverty than other tipped workers. Than other workers. We also know that there are 9 states in the country where tipped workers make the full minimum wage plus tips. That includes California, Oregon, and Washington State. And the tipped workers in those states are much happier because their income is higher. They have a solid base wage, and they continue to give tips. The false narrative that Initiative 77 would eliminate tips, and that's just wrong.
Thank you. Mr. Jayaraman, your answer to this question, do you agree with the council's repeal of I-77?
I think the ballot initiative was fundamentally flawed in the sense that it was the way it was written, because the council had already passed legislation to address many of the stipulations in that in the initiative. Secondly, it was put on the primary ballot, and it should have been put on the general election ballot. And I think it was such a close vote. I don't know that that same vote would have stood had it been actually voted on in the general election. However, I do think we have an opportunity coming out of the COVID to rethink how we ensure that our tipped workers make at least the minimum wage, which is already under current law. And I think we should continue that. And businesses are expected to do that. I do think we should enlist our Attorney General to ensure that establishments are doing their part and are not engaging in wage theft.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelor, you'd like to weigh in?
Yeah, could I just say that the vote on Initiative 77 wasn't close. It won by a 10% margin and won in 7 of 8 of the wards across our city. The voters of the District of Columbia overwhelmingly supported Initiative 77, and it was the duty of the council to preserve the will of voters. And I think no matter, again, whether you agree with it or not, we should have. I was in support of Initiative 77 for a lot of reasons, but one of many is that we talk about a lot, and the voices that really clamored in opposition were front of house folks. And sure, if you're a bartender on a busy strip or a server on a busy strip, you're going to have a good night most nights. But if you're working back of house, or you're not a restaurant worker, if you're a valet or some other tipped worker, you struggle from day to day. And so it wasn't just about our restaurant industry. It was about raising the economic floor for our service workers, who we are now seeing are essential, but quite frankly have treated them like second-class citizens in our city for far too long.
Thank you.
And so I'm in support of 77 and will vote to reinstate it if on the council.
Thank you. Alex Padro?
So I opposed Prop 77 because I spent hundreds of hours talking to primarily restaurant and bar workers because that's part of my day job is to work with small businesses. So I heard directly from them, and I do believe that the council acted wisely in repealing it. However, those types of workers that don't have the ability to make substantially more than the minimum wage as a result of being able to get strong tips, then I would be in favor of having a higher minimum wage specifically for those type of workers, but not for those that generally do benefit from having access to tips.
Thank you. And Mr. Goodwin, I think you're the only person who hasn't spoken on this.
Yeah, there have been many instances in the past of voter referendums being overturned by the council that I think all of us here would agree with. First and foremost is the overturn of mandatory minimum sentencing, where 71% of district residents supported mandatory minimum sentencing. But the council, I think in all of its wisdom, agreed to turn over the will of the voters in that case. I spoke to hundreds, if not thousands of workers in the industry, and I'm a partner in a restaurant. So I know that our average worker makes $33 an hour. While it's a $5 base, the tips far exceed what a $15 minimum wage would net them. They were overwhelmingly against Initiative 77. So I think we need to think more about the process of writing voter referendums, because they all pretty much pass. That's because they're written in a way that it sounds good to voters who are uninformed about what the unintended consequences of the legislation is. So I'd like us to have a more thorough vetting process to ensure that we don't have to overturn the will of the voters in the future.
Thank you. Okay, this next question here, which DC agency do you believe is most in need of reform, and how would you fix it? Starting with Mr. Batchelor.
Sure, I was going to say it's a tie between DCRA and DOES, but I'll talk about the Department of Employment Services because I think it's really about getting our residents back to work in the short term. The Department of Employment Services needs attention and it needs investment. Of all the district government agencies, I think it's had the most frequent turnover of agency heads this administration and maybe last. We need stability at the Department of Employment Services, and we need to make sure that we're investing not just in the relationships that link people to training, but also make sure that that training links them to living wage work. We also need to make sure that DOES has the infrastructure it needs to do all of that work. I think it's no secret to anybody who applied for unemployment that the DOES is working on an antiquated system and has been for a very long time. Those are the type of investments we've got to make now to better support our workforce and getting people back to work. And that'll be something I'll be focused on as a member of the council.
Thank you. Mr. Lazier, which DC agency is most troubled and how would you fix it?
I mean, I'm gonna go for the Department of Employment Services as well, and just say that I've just heard so many DC residents say, I went through training, I got a certificate, and I never got a job. And that is just heartbreaking and a shame, and it just is a sign that something is wrong. I think it largely reflects a lack of transparency and oversight and accountability. So one thing that I want to add is that one of the goals that I would have as a council member is to strengthen the council's ability to do oversight and hold the mayor accountable when agencies aren't performing well. That most state legislatures across the country have a research and policy arm to do policy development, policy oversight, evaluation, and the DC Council doesn't have that, and it weakens its ability to hold the mayor accountable. So as a council member, I would push to strengthen the DC Council's research arm to make it at co-equal with the mayor, rather than sitting by watching the mayor run programs ineffectively and then fail to share information with the council that allows them to do oversight.
Thank you. Mr. J. Rahman, the most troubled DC agency and how you would fix it?
Yeah, I think DCRA is probably number one, followed by DDOT. DCRA, I think it's so convoluted that any simple person, like a friend of mine who went to the DCR to get a simple license, he was sent to 4 different locations because one of his form said basement, his license said B, and they couldn't think outside the box and say, hey, they're the same thing. He spent 4 hours and never got this permit to be able to, for a PTA to be able to hold a bake sale. This is the kind of problems that we have. It is agencies that work in silos. They don't talk to each other. And it's a check the box mentality that we need to really, really reform in order for people to get things done. That's what's more important. And as a council member, that's what I'll do. You can call me. I'll help you get things done. And along the way, we will reform DCRA to make sure it works for you and not be a barrier to getting things done.
This question was submitted earlier this week via email. Oh, sorry, Mr. Padro, you have something, you have thoughts?
I wanted to offer up DCPS as the agency that is in most need of reform, and that is because I think it is one of the agencies that is the least accountable to its constituents. I think that DCPS does not listen to parents. They don't listen to the students, and they don't listen to communities. And I think that's would be addressed by returning the full powers of control over the education process to the fully elected school board for the District of Columbia, and ending mayoral control.
Thank you. Okay, so this question was submitted earlier this week via email. It is directed at Marcus Goodwin. The question is, it starts, you are a developer. Please tell us which projects you've helped develop in the district, and specifically what portions of those projects were set aside as affordable.
Yeah, I can talk about the last 2 projects I worked on. Currently, I'm unemployed. I haven't been working since April, but one delivered in October of 2019. It's 1164 Bladensburg Avenue, Northeast, and it's 55 units that are 100% senior affordable units. They're completely leased up at this point, but it's a project that I'm really proud to be a part of because it's providing affordable housing for seniors and use Housing Production Trust Fund dollars that were approved 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago, a couple of cycles ago. And most recently, 1100 Eastern Avenue Northeast, which converted a shopping center that a family owned and wanted to sell that had 6 businesses there and was converted now to 63 affordable units. 100% of the units are affordable, either 0 to 30% AMI, 30 to 50, or up to 60% of AMI units. And they're 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. I believe 16% of units are 3 bedrooms, around 25 or 30% are 2 bedrooms, and the remaining units are 1 bedroom units. And this is an area that had no units. The ground level is being reprogrammed for some of the old tenants to come back to, including a daycare and a small market that we want to get back into the space to ensure that the community has an opportunity to participate in the commercial component of the project. And one last project I'll quickly talk about is on Benning Road, the Benning Market, which Mary Blackford, a brilliant entrepreneur, just won a $150,000 prize from Essence Magazine to invest in food options. She's going to have 12 different stalls. It's going to be like a Black Union Market, is the way it's been described. And it's coming to the River Terrace community in Ward 7. So that's a really exciting project. And those are all projects I've worked on in the past 12 months.
Thank you. Mr. Bajo, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'm not a developer, but I've been responsible for facilitating development, and one of the projects that I'm the most proud of is called the Hodge on 7th. It's a 91 unit senior affordable building that's part of the City Market at O project. That was the result of the developer coming to me and asking, what does the community want in terms of amenities for us to be able to get greater density for this mixed-use project, which was 2 square blocks. And the answer after talking to my constituents was we wanted to see senior housing. So I was then on the board of Emmaus Services for the Aging. So I partnered Emmaus with the developer. We came up with a concept of a building that would use housing vouchers to be able to bring seniors from throughout the community and throughout the city to that building and have the new tenants, pay only 30% of their income to be able to live in a complex where there are units that are as expensive as $8,000 a month, and where those seniors will be able to use all of the amenities that people that are paying market rate. When it opened, there were 500 people on the waiting list.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelor?
Yeah, very quickly, I'd just like to, I think, get further clarity and clarification on that. While I, appreciate people who really dig in to build affordable housing in our community, what struck me about that 1100 Eastern project is that it also, right, the developers that, quite frankly, Marcus works for, also shut out that daycare that they said they're bringing back from their center with 1-day notice, padlocked it when families and children were arriving. So it's not just about it's not just about what you develop in community, but how you develop. And I think we've also got to hold folks to a higher standard to say that when you come into communities and bring them what you think they need, that you also don't disrespect them in the way that I think so many residents at 1100 Eastern were disrespected during that process.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Would you like 30 seconds to respond?
Yeah, sure. The unfortunate circumstance of tenants being locked out happened before I even worked for the firm. And it had to do with, inexcusably, the health conditions of the property, which were not sanitary and safe for young children to be at. And the former owner's conditions that he subjected the people to were just horrible, unacceptable, and frankly, illegal. So it really was not a safe place because of the environmental impacts that young children were being exposed to. But I was brought in to structure the community benefits agreement and help close on the financing to get the project built, which I did so when I did come on in the beginning of 2019. So that project has a fully vetted community benefits agreement with the Deanwood Civic Association, which allows that daycare to come back to the property when it's completed. So hopefully 12 months from now, we'll be seeing them at the ground level along Sheriff Road in the space that they were, and it's going to be rebuilt, and they're going to be able to re-enter at the same rate that they were at before they had to leave for the project to be redeveloped. So thanks for bringing that up.
Okay, I'd like to see by a show of hands. So raise your hand if your answer is yes. Do you support a % excise tax increase on soda and sugary beverages? Mr. Padro and Mr. Lazier do support the tax increase. Mr. Padro, please explain.
Sure. Obviously, if those proceeds from those taxes are going to be spent specifically on improving access to healthcare, when those particular products are particularly deleterious to health, then just as I would recommend maximizing taxes on tobacco products, I would be in favor of a very modest tax on those sugary drinks.
Thank you. Mr. Lazier, do you agree with Mr. Padro's explanation?
I mean, I'll just offer my own. So I do support putting an excise tax on sugary beverages like the Don't Mute My Health campaign led by folks like Ronnie Webb and Stuart Anderson in Ward 8 support. We know that sugary drinks are marketed heavily in low-income communities of color, particularly at teenagers. We know they have an especially high connection to obesity. So making those products more expensive will reduce their consumption and improve and can lead to better health. I want a really important distinction, though, is obviously it will make buying sugary beverages more expensive for those people who still do it and will fall especially hard on low-income families. So I would only do it if the tax proceeds were used as in a way to funnel back to the folks who are affected, such as an increase in SNAP/food stamp benefits, or an increase in the earned income tax credit for working families. I would only support it if the proceeds from the tax are then funneled back to the people whose costs would be who'd be most hard affected.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelor, you would not support this tax increase. Why?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that I won't support a tax on sugary drinks until it's easier for folks in my neighborhood to get access to fresh fruits and produce than it is to get a sugary drink, where it's easier to walk to a grocery store than it is to walk to a corner store. And that's not just the case. So in reality, quite frankly, this excise tax is going to be a tax on the poor, no matter how you spin it, right? That the folks who have the most scarcity have the least options. And most of the times those options are the sugary things we're taxing, right? The folks who have access to fresh fruits and produce, who have access to healthy foods and can afford to do that, aren't drinking these beverages. And so when you think about who this is going to impact both immediately, but also long term, it's going to be our poor city residents. I'm all about expanding access to health and nutrition, but not, again, doing it, not driving people's health on the backs of the folks that we're supposed to be saving in the first place.
Thank you. This next question here, I believe I want to start with Mr. J. Rahman. Do you believe mayoral control of schools is working? Please explain your answer.
Before the mayors took control of the schools, we were in terrible shape. I think we've made some progress with the mayor, and I think we've seen some market improvements in our education system. I think we need to go a lot further and offer more vocational educations in our high schools, and we need to have more arts and theater options for our students, and particularly for students that view alternates to going to college as an option, because those jobs are available. And I would like to see the mayor do more with offering those within our schools, and then use the community college system as a post-secondary next step to a good paying job without having all the debt that comes with going to college. And it's not right for everybody, and one size should not fit all, and students should have that option and parents should have that option.
Thank you. Mr. Goodwin, do you care to weigh in? Mr. Goodwin, on mayoral control of schools.
Yeah, I'm one of the few people who would preserve mayoral control of schools. Every other state in the United States has a governor that oversees and ensures that a state superintendent, or a chancellor in our case, oversees the performance of our schools. And I think that we have a very streamlined structure that allows for clear accountability and oversight of our educational system. Are things perfect? Absolutely not. But I do see and know that today, the gains that we've had from our Black and Brown, our Black and Latino youth is real. Since 2007, we've had marked improvement in their test scores in our public school system, and we've seen a better allocation of resources because people have the ability to go to schools that they otherwise would not have had the opportunity. They would have felt, and they have felt when I was growing up, stuck in a neighborhood school that may or may not be perfect for the learning environment that their child needed. So I'm someone who is supportive of school choice and think that the structure that we have now is better than the structure that we had before, because we can't go back to get to the future. We have to move forward to the future.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelor, your thoughts on this issue?
Sure. Having had a front row seat to this as a member of the State Board of Education representing Ward 8 schools, most of that could not be farthest from the truth. There are no clear lines of democracy or accountability in our education system. The state superintendent, the chancellor, most of the public charter school board, if not all, are direct employees or appointees of the mayor. There is no accountability. And the only democratic body elected exclusively focused on education, which I happen to sit, has very narrow authority to make impact on our behalf. And then when we talk about executive control of the schools in DC, absent a governor and a state and an independent state agency that can hold local education agencies accountable, this is literally the most extreme form of mayoral control, where quite frankly, because of what has been very anemic and, cowardly, reaction to what the mayor has done from the council, we've had no accountability, right? I'm in support of school choice, but I'm also in support of making sure that all of those schools report the same information, that we know where the money's going. And we have seen time and time again, not just this administration, but the past 3 or 4 hold up barriers when families are saying we want a more direct role in shaping the educational outcomes of our communities and our students. And we don't have to sacrifice democracy for progress. And quite frankly, we've sacrificed a whole lot of democracy and have seen very little progress for the students left farthest behind. And so I'm going to go to the council to fight for a system that works better, that our families and educators are included, but that also invests boldly in moving the needle for our students left farthest behind.
Thank you. Mr. Lazier, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, man, I just think it's increasingly clear that mayoral control has not delivered the promises and has had too many drawbacks. All we have to look at is what happened this past summer, where the mayor pushed to open schools up early, in person, with a hybrid model, without engaging parents, without engaging teachers, and only had to pull back at the last minute when there was pressure from the teachers union and from school districts around the region going virtual. And then you also had what I mentioned earlier, where the chancellor kept saying over and over and over again that we have enough technology for our students, only to reveal just in the last month that 60% of students need technology. There's an incredible lack of transparency, and the only evaluation of mayoral control found 2 important things: a huge loss of transparency and parental engagement, and number 2, that there was no improvement in reducing the achievement inequity between Black and Brown students and white students. It hasn't worked, and it's time to do something different that is more connected to the people, to parents, to teachers, and to other stakeholders.
Thank you. Let's see, this next question here, we are running a little short on time.
Can you let out?
Mitch.
Oh, sorry.
I did want to.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Pedro, please go ahead.
Even though I commented on it in an earlier question, yes, absolutely. I believe that the mayor and the chancellor and the deputy mayor for education, unaccountable to the parents, unaccountable to the students, unaccountable to the community, and we absolutely need to return to a scenario where our elected State Board of Education is directly accountable to our citizens, and we get the bang for the buck for the huge investment that we're making in education in our city.
And Mr. Jayaraman, you'll have the last word of the evening.
Thank you very much. I think one of the things we can do, however, is what we do at the ANC. ANCs get great weight in the decisions they make that agencies have to adhere to. Similarly, I think the school board should be provided with that same kind of leverage and great weight in their opinions because they are elected by the people. And I think that's a fair balance in terms of accountability and making sure that the voices of parents and students and the community are being heard. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you. So that, I believe, concludes the forum Q&A for this evening. Thank you all for participating. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in and for submitting questions. Looks like Mr. Goodwin might have something to say.
I was just wondering if all of us could get 30 seconds to close.
I don't have a problem with that. Bianca is telling me yes. So we'll start with you, Mr. Goodwin, 30 seconds.
Thank you so much for putting this on. This is definitely the most fun I've had in a debate this whole season. So thank you all for engaging in the conversation. I know that we need not just reformation, but transformation in the district. I don't want us to go backward, but go forward to the future. We need to have young, energetic, powerful leadership that's going to transform this city for the better. I'm ready for the challenge. I'm a native-born Washingtonian. Please follow me and join me on this mission with 49 days to go to find a good win for DC. So follow me on Good Win for DC on social media or goodwinfordc.com. Thank you.
Mr. Lazier, I'm just going to go counterclockwise on my screen. Mr. Lazier, you're next. 30 seconds.
I think this was a great forum and that it really showed some differences in that, who supports supporting the will of the people and who doesn't, who supports raising wages for tip workers and who doesn't, who supports holding our schools accountable and who doesn't. And I'm running to be a progressive leader in the city, as I've been for the last 20 years. And that leadership is reflected in the endorsements I've received from Attorney General Carl Racine, Janice Lewis-George, Councilmember Brianne Nadeau, the Sierra Club, a host of unions, including SEIU 32BJ and Unite Here Local 25, the hotel and restaurant workers, as well as a number of social justice organizations like DC Democracy and the Working Family Party.
Mr. Batchelor, 30 seconds.
Thank you. Again, I'm Marcus Batchelor. I'll be number 7 on your ballot for DC Council at Large. I'm asking for your vote on or before November 3rd because we need a new generation of leadership, not just leadership with the type of experience to get things done, but also the record of service. I've worked on the ground, working to bridge our city's deep divides, and for the last 6 years have worked in government, making policy, building consensus, not just inside government, but across our communities. If we do that, if we elect somebody with that type of experience, but also with the type of perspective that will allow them to know what it's like to live on the short end of our city's divides and work to close them, we'll build a city that works for everyone. And so I hope to get your support on November 3rd. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Mr. Jayaraman, 30 seconds to you.
Thank you so much. I think I'm the right person at the right time. The city needs somebody who will help us get out of the COVID crisis, and I'm the best prepared to do that. I'm a father. In my free time, I coach Little League, and I have the right experience and the right time for this position. I've got the experience. I've worked with the ANCs, and I'm on the vice chair of the ANC 6B. And so I ask for your vote in November or sooner when the ballots come out. Please check out my email, my website at chander2020.com, and I ask for your support in October and in November. Thank you so much.
Mr. Padro, you get the last word of the evening, it turns out.
As the most experienced, government official that is actually running for this seat with 20 years of experience as an advisory neighborhood commissioner, I would love to be able to work with the Ward 6 council member to address the issues that Southwest has been crying out for help on, concerns about gentrification, the redevelopment of public housing, reducing congestion, dealing with parking issues, crime issues, school seats. So please go to my website at alexpondro.com and follow me at alexpondro DC on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I look forward to the opportunity to work with all of my neighbors in Ward 6 Southwest.
Thank you. Okay, I think that actually does conclude our presentation this evening. Do I kick it back to Bianca, I think? There she is. You can't, there you go.
Hi, everyone. So sorry. Yes, I first and foremost just want to thank all of our candidates for tonight. You all have done wonderfully. Mitch, awesome job moderating tonight's panel. I think tonight we've reached at least, I just checked my phone and Carlton has let me know that we have reached 855 views tonight.
Which I think is more than Fennett had last night, right?
Yeah, that's that's a record for us. Last night, I believe we had a little over 100 participants viewing. Not all of them registered, but to have that number, like, that's completely incredible. So I just want to thank you all again for your time. This was fun. I hope you all had a lot of fun. And for our audience who are viewing right now, we will be posting tonight's coverage on all of our social media networks tomorrow. So you can look at tonight's coverage on our Facebook page and our Twitter page as well. So thank you all again. That's all that I have for my closing remarks. All right, that's it. Everyone is free to go. Have a great evening. And again, to tune in to tonight, we will post it live